So we've currently got class 31, number 31327 in the works department at the moment, and we're currently replacing the old failed parkside control equipment with a brand new M-Tronics traction and sound system. Hi there, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the class 31 refurbishment and upgrade project that I'm currently doing. If you remember in part 5 I said I'd come back to you when I'd fixed these 4 trunkings down onto the base of the locomotive, which I've now done, so I'm back. And I did have to put some extensions onto these far ends to make it just as long as I wanted, because these were just offcuts of what I had kicking about at home, and so I had to put the extensions on. If you come across a little bit closer, I'll show you what went on there. So these are the extension pieces that I put on the end of these longer lengths, and the way I fitted them was I just laid that alongside at the end of this piece and then just slipped the lid over slightly like that to keep things in alignment, so the lid was now overlapping both sections of trunking, and then I just arranged it such that I could drill it straight and they were all in a straight line then, or near enough. And the only reason the extensions are there is to form a bridge really, such that the incoming power supply to the circuit breakers can all come in on the bottom side, and then the load going out to the motors and whatever can come out of the top and just drop into the trunking and disappear back under this metal rail that these circuit breakers and connectors are attached to. Because I hope to bring as many cables back to this position as I can, and this position is the circuit breakers for each motor, but the main circuit breaker for the 4 motors, and the circuit breaker for the controls, etc. This will get updated to a B 5 amp rather than a C 3 amp. I'm going to update that circuit breaker to this same make, and that's the hope. And these others are connectors, just through connectors, and I'm hoping to take all the negatives through there to try and common the negatives up as best I can, etc., and keep all the wiring as clear as possible really as to what's going on, rather than having connections all over the place. I'm hoping to get the connections predominantly back to these areas here, and then it's all there in front of me for future use, future sorting out, trouble locating, fault finding. So this will have to go about here, because I'll need to trim some off here because of the shape of this base plate to house the body. It narrows at this end unfortunately, but I want to keep these as far that way as possible. Then if ever I can get a mister unit in here to create an exhaust type thing, that would be great, but I'm not entirely convinced I'll get one in. It's looking pretty grim at the moment, but I may get smaller batteries yet. But for just this season, well, what's left of this season, I'm going to persevere with the larger car batteries that I've currently got. And of course nothing's set in stone, so all of this can be changed and or whatever. It can all be rehashed and completely changed at a later date if I find something's not quite suitable for me. But that's what I did, I just overlapped the lid a little bit just to get this end in line, and then that end I swung it round and picked up where it needed to be, drilled and bolted through, and that's it. It's good. But at least these bits now form a cableway for my cables to go around and into and come back under itself. So hopefully we'll get that fitted today now. So hopefully you can see now that I've been replacing the old square nuts, which are these here. I've been replacing the old square nuts with these nylock nuts. And the nylon piece, which we can hopefully see there, the blue piece, that grips down onto the thread of the bolt and stops this shaking loose like these do. There's nothing to stop them shaking loose, and that's just what they do, they shake loose. And those are just a standard roofing nut, as we call them. It's just a square nut. I've been replacing all of them on these studs here with the nylon type, and I'll show you on this last one here how I've been doing that. So I've just taken the old nut off and put the nylon nut on. And then I've been straddling the base. You need a very broad flat-ended screwdriver to go into these very broad sort of screws. And then just tighten them up. When the nut tightens down against the steel, it becomes a little too hard to turn with the screwdriver. Then's the time to crank down on the spanner and tighten them in with the spanner. And then what I've been doing, I've been sawing most of the head off, the remaining thread, with a 1mm steel cutting disc in the angle grinder. And then I've been peening the remainder of the head over with a ball peen hammer. I'll just get that out of sight. So that's the ball peen hammer. So what I've been doing with these others that are in the trunking, I have been using this hammer, and I've been setting the wedge into the trunking against the back of the bolt and then tipping it over so that the hammer is now on the floor like that, with the bolt attached to there almost. And once it was like that, I've peened it over with the ball of the hammer, which has the idea of mushrooming over the outside of the threads, etc. So it opens them up and mushrooms them out. And then to get rid of any sharp edges, then I've been hitting the remainder with the flat, and any sharp edges, that sort of knocked them off then. So I haven't needed to file anything, but they're all quite reasonably smooth now. I'm not going to cut my hand on them if I brush against them at all. So that's what I was doing, ball peening over that way to start with, and then once it was almost down, just finishing it off with that, and again with this against the floor. And with the side ones here, these side ones, I've been using this steel section here to put against this side here. So I've tipped that over that way say like that, and then use the mass of this to support the head whilst I've knocked these over, but predominantly with this side of the hammer now, because I haven't had really much room to get the ball peen in. So I've been hitting with this side of the hammer, and the idea is that whilst the nylon side of it locks the nut tightly in place and hopefully it won't come off with vibration, the peening over with this hammer etc will ensure that even if it slackens off, the nut will never come off unless you've actually got a spanner on it to drive it off. That's the thoughts and the theories, and that's the way I've been doing it. So I'll just show you on this last one how I've been doing that. That's it, the nylock part now. I can't hold that any longer with my fingers. So now I need the spanner. Tighten down now. So I'll just do this one on camera, and then I'll do the rest just as I have been doing. So I'm just using the steel section now as a mass for when I hit this. So there it is, shortened back and knocked flat. So I'll do these others now, and then we can think about putting the circuit breakers over here somehow. If you haven't seen this arrangement before, this is called top hat rail, because it's the shape of a top hat when you put it that way up like that. So they call it top hat rail, and it fixes to whatever via these holes in the back of it here, and the space beneath the circuit breakers and these clamps here These are end clamps to hold everything in place once you've got whatever you need on your rail. And these are the connectors that will hopefully connect through the negatives, or commons as you might call it, on the wiring system. They're just a through link connector, 2 screws in the top and the cables going at the end there. And these are all part of a DIN rail type system, as they call it. And these pieces all go together side by side, but to help them all link in and look nice and hold themselves, their integrity, they've all got little linking connector there, little plastic linking connector. But because mine are going between circuit breakers rather than connecting together like that, I'm going to trim these off with the junior hacksaw, such that I can get everything a little bit nearer together, because I'm very tight for space with the width of the locomotive and these connector rails. So I'll come back to you when I've done that. If you haven't seen how this system works, it's quite simple really, in that this is like a hook that clamps onto that side like that, and the other side is somewhat spring loaded, and that clamps onto it like that. And then to get it back off, you will just ease that out and pull it off. But when they're on, you can slide them along if you wanted to make room for other fitments to be pushed in between. And to stop things coming off the end, there are these end stops, as they call it, and these clamp on again the same way, but then there are 2 screws, and you tighten the 2 screws up and they deform the plastic to grip onto this top hat section. There's the top hat shape again. So these screws make that clamp on so that then they won't slide along any further. So I'm having one on one end and one on the other end, and all the bits will be in between. And I've just cut those tags off that were there, the tags that were preventing them going together so cleanly together, as it were. Those bits were stopping it and spreading things out along the rail, and I really am fighting for space inside the frame of the locomotive, so I've taken those off in the hope that I can gain an extra couple of millimeters. And then I'm going to have to shape this to somewhere near the shape of the cone of the locomotive front end, and then I'll use these holes, I'll drill and fix down through into the base and stand this slightly off the base on a bit of a plinth on nuts and bolts below here. So that's the plan. Let's crack on with that. I'll show you when I've got a bit nearer. So now I'm going to look into mounting this top hat rail onto this base here. And what I plan to do is to drill through here, and then I'll be drilling through there with a 5mm drill bit, and I'll be using a 6mm tap to put into the hole, and I'll just screw that in, and this tap will form a thread in the plate that I can then screw a bolt into, but I'll be screwing the bolt in from underneath. And this is the format which I'm hoping to do. So assuming then for a moment that this nut that's rotating is the aluminium base, I'll drill through the aluminium base with a 5mm, then I'll tap a thread into it with the 6mm tap, and then I'll screw this bolt tight up against the underside of here, tight up against there, and then when it's like that, I'll then run an eye lock nut down against the top of here, locking this bolt in place such that the bolt won't slip through, and then I'll put another eye lock nut on backwards effectively, such that I can put it under there and then maybe screw it back up if needs be. But I'm going to sandwich this top hat rail with two nylock nuts on the bolt that will be standing up, because it's coming through the base from underside like that. That's what I plan to do. So if you don't know threading sizes and drills etc, you can always look the information up in a book or on a sheet like I've got here. And we're looking at a metric thread, 6mm metric thread. So 6mm, we would look down, nominal size of the tap, which is 6mm. We would look down here to find the 6. We know it's by 1mm pitch, because it says so on the tap. And then we'll look across then, and we see that the tapping drill would be a 5mm there. And if we wanted a clearance hole drilling, we could go 6.1mm for a clearance drill, and then the bolt would drop straight through. But that's how to use this this business here. And on the tap it tells us that it's a 6mm tap. It's written on the side of the tap. Not sure you can make it out just there, but it is ISO. There it is, metric M6. If you don't have any paperwork or books regarding a size for the correct tapping size drill, you could always pick a drill up from your toolbox and try the diameter here of the drill against this shank part of the tap here. And if the two appear to be the same, but when you lay the drill in front of the tap, you can still see threads either side of the tap showing, then you can be fairly assured that this drill should then be okay for that tap. But if you go carefully when trying to tap it in, just to make sure. But that's a fairly good rule of thumb. If this size here is the same as that size there, and you can still see threads when you place the drill on top of the tap, if you can still see threads either side of this drill, then proceed with that and see how you go, nice and steady away. So if we come down and have a look, then we can see now that the bolt came through from the bottom, and then it's locked in place by this nylock nut here, and then another nylock nut then is supporting this top hat section, and then this top nylock nut is locking this top hat section down onto that lower stud, and that's what's happening at the other side as well. So I think that's worked out rather well, to be honest. And as we could see when I sawed it off, that it's quite a robust system. There was no movement in it, and we can see that there is space between the trunking and the top hat section as such. There is a slight space, so that now is a bridge. And perhaps when it's all put together, I could even look through the windows of the locomotive and see whether any of these MCBs have actually tripped. Because when it's working, they'll all be facing the same way. So if one's out of line with the other, we'll know that perhaps one of them's tripped without having to take the locomotive apart to have a look and check. And if we then look at this end of the locomotive, I think next time we'll have a look at fitting this in place using some T-bolt type fixings in these slots here. So we'll fix that down to the aluminium, and then the aluminium base can work as a heat sink in case this gets hot. And we'll also look at fitting some of these, and these are just larger ones of them. So I'll drill some holes in here and fit these in. These are 25mm, these ones. And I'll arrange them where they need to be and drill them in place there with a bush again on the bottom side facing up. And the idea behind that is I'm going to use these as access points for straps to hold the batteries down when I put the batteries in. And also I'll need to put the speaker box here. So perhaps we'll look at this in the next episode and get this fixed in, and look at fixing the batteries in, etc., and consider the speaker box, which is here. Consider the speaker box, what's happening with that. That's going in there somewhere like that. And having the speaker in a box protects the speaker from the elements and from touch and knocking about while you're working in or around the locomotive. And also it gives me a fixing point for some of the other circuit boards that go along with this control equipment. On there and on there I'm planning to perhaps hang some electronic components on there. So next time I think we'll see how all that little lot fits together if we can.